use of a millionaire real estate developer in Las Vegas had all the appearances of foul play. In his will, he had hinted that something terrible might happen to him. And a scuba diver, a ballistics expert, and a pizza delivery man all provided evidence that his premonition was correct. Every 20 minutes, a new home is finished in Las Vegas, Nevada, making it one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. And that's how Ron Rudin made his fortune building residential housing in the Las Vegas suburbs.
Cold Creek was a beautiful development. It was one of the first developments where people could go and buy an acre of land and be at 7,200 feet and maybe 30 degrees cooler in the summertime.
Despite his success, Ron Rudin also made some enemies.
He was known to evict people. He was known to foreclose on people. He held their mortgages. If they didn't pay, they had to go. So there were a lot of people who didn't like Ron Rudin.
To protect himself, Ron took the necessary precautions.
Ron lived in a virtual fortress. He had a house that was surrounded by cinder block wall and barbed wire, and inside were attack dogs and this elaborate security system, and inside that was an armory full of guns, rifles, and all this weaponry.
On a Monday morning in 1994, Ron Rudin didn't show up for work as he had always done in the 20 years he was in business.
As soon as he wasn't there to open the business a half hour before the office opened, his employees knew something was wrong. And the fact that he lived 30 feet from the office also told them that there was something wrong.
Ron was not one to disappear, surely, and he was certainly not one to leave his business unattended.
Ron's fifth wife, Margaret, called police to report him missing. She said he didn't come home the night before.
After that night, Ron Rudin just disappeared off the face of the earth. There were no ATM transactions, no account activity. He wasn't seen anywhere. His cell phone wasn't being used.
A week later, police found Ron's car in the parking lot of a gentleman's club just off the Vegas Strip.
The man who found the car, the night manager at the strip club, was a former disgraced police officer in Las Vegas who once had mob ties. This immediately raised a lot of eyebrows and made people wonder, is there an organized crime connection to this disappearance?
Inside the car were traces of blood too badly degraded for DNA testing. Forensic experts also found mud.
Well, the detectives had developed a theory. Ron Rudin's body had been transported in the car or in a trunk in the car.
But a forensic analysis could not determine where the mud came from. 1 month later, about 60 miles away, a man hiking along Lake Mojave made a gruesome discovery. He found a human skull.
The skull itself was pretty much intact, and it was in a ravine about 20 yards away from an area that had been burned and charred. And we could see a lot of ash and a lot of debris and a lot of human remains.
Nearby, police found a gold bracelet with diamonds spelling out the name Ron.
It looked like it was placed there as if somebody wanted them to find it.
They told me briefly how he was found, the condition of his body. It broke my heart that this man had really worked so incredibly hard, been good to lots of people, and that would be where his last remains would be.
What started out as a missing persons case was now a murder investigation.
It was just a complete mystery. You know, who on earth would do it?
Dental records confirmed that the skull found on the shores of Lake Mojave belonged to Ron Rudin. The medical examiner determined that Ron had been shot in the head 4 times with a .22 caliber pistol. Not far from where the skull was discovered was a fire pit. Tests on the soil indicated Ron's body had been cremated.
Once the fire started, the fat kept the fire going, much like you would burn a piece of meat on a barbecue.
You know, it sounds kind of disgusting, but, you know, in forensics, that's what you deal with when you're trying to prove what happened.
Also in the pit were several strips of metal and a locking mechanism, which looked like pieces of a trunk. It was clear to crime scene investigators that this was not an organized crime hit.
You know, people wanted to think it was a mob hit, and the fact that Ron's car was found behind a strip club after he disappeared only added to sort of the unseemly feel of the case.
A look into Ron's background revealed several potential suspects.
Ron was known to be, what we would call today as a player. He had girlfriends and had affairs, according to friends and relatives. He certainly didn't deserve to be murdered over it, but people get killed for less.
One of the women Ron was allegedly involved with, Sue Lyles, told police about this anonymous letter her children received in the mail shortly before Ron was murdered.
Your mother has been screwing Ron and keeping the secret from his wife and her husband. You're being told now to be prepared for a big scandal.
When Ron saw this letter, he was furious and convinced that his wife, Margaret, had written it. Margaret denied having anything to do with it. The search of the Rudins' home turned up nothing suspicious. But the search of Margaret Rudin's antique store in town was far more telling.
I found 2 receipts for 2 humpback trunks or steamer trunks, and by then we knew that that's what the body was found in. I noticed that one trunk had been sold to Margaret's sister, and the other trunk, there was no indication in her inventory that it was sold, but it was nowhere in the store.
And in Ron's will was another clue.
Ron had basically left a clue to solving his murder in his will. And in his will, he said that if he died by violent means, and even specified gunshot or some other thing, extraordinary steps should be taken to look into this death, and people should look into whoever was going to get the money, the beneficiary.
And he gave a huge portion of his estate over to friends and co-workers and people that he'd had some sort of relationship of trust in the past. And he really enriched them after his death. And even during his life, he could be a very, very generous individual.
Ron's 5th wife, Margaret, was to receive the bulk of his estate, which was approximately $7 million.
When it eventually came out that there was that much money involved, it was really a shock to us.
Although police found nothing suspicious when they searched Rudin's home, a local handyman told police he saw plenty that was suspicious when he worked there just days after Ron disappeared.
He worked for Margaret and helped her decorate, and he helped her clean up. She told him, get rid of this mattress, get rid of the bed, and tear out the carpet.
He found this dry, gooey, crunchy material in the carpeting that he was sure was blood.
The handyman helped Margaret convert the master bedroom into an office. Although the room had been redecorated, investigators decided to test the walls and ceiling for blood that may have been removed.
Used the luminol. It looked like the Milky Way.
Lit up like a Christmas tree. They were certain this was the death scene.
One of the homicide detectives was walking around, and he had kind of a funny look on his face, and then he stopped and he said, wow, I think I've been in here before.
And he was right. 20 years earlier, Ron's 2nd wife, Peggy, shot and killed herself in that same bedroom. Now, investigators couldn't be certain whether it was Ron's blood on the walls and ceiling or that of his previous wife's suicide. But on the wall, just above where the Rudin's bed had been, was a photograph of wife number 5, Margaret Rudin. And on it was an important clue. The investigation into the murder of Las Vegas millionaire real estate developer Ron Rudin had initially focused on his ex-wives and business contacts.
Looked at a bunch of different people, other business associates, people who worked with Ron, other ex-wives, other relatives, but everything came up empty.
Inside Ron Rudin's bedroom, forensic scientists found evidence of blood on the walls and ceiling, blood that had been removed. Forensic scientist Mike Perkins performed a microscopic examination of the few blood drops that remained.
We measure the width and the length of the stains, and using a real simple mathematical formula, we're able to determine the approximate impact angle of those blood drops on those surfaces.
Perkins concluded the blood hit the wall at high velocity, consistent with gunshots from 2 locations. Several shots originated from the right side of the bed, and one from the left. Ron's previous wives told investigators that Ron always slept with the right side of his head on the pillow. Not surprisingly, the medical examiner found 4 bullet holes in the left side of Ron's skull.
Once we had placed it in that position that Ron would have slept, the holes And the directionality of the bullet wounds matched perfectly with the high-velocity blood spatter that was on the wall and on the ceiling.
But whose blood was it?
We learned from the housekeeper that Ron, when he was getting ready in the morning, would cut himself shaving and would dab himself with a handkerchief.
Investigators located that handkerchief in Ron's bathroom, then compared the blood to the blood found on the walls and ceiling of the master bedroom, and it matched.
The odds that were listed in the DNA report were 1 in 600 billion odds that it was anybody else's other than Ron's.
There was a photograph of Margaret Rudin hanging on the wall of the bedroom above the bed, which showed evidence that some kind of liquid had been professionally removed from the picture. Investigators believe that liquid was Ron Rudin's blood. Based on the forensic evidence, the police decided to arrest Margaret Rudin for her husband's murder.
My partner had called her attorney and said, hey, we've got an indictment on your client. Will you surrender her? Do we need to go get her? He says, I don't know where she's at. And sure enough, she was gone. Gone. Disappeared and was in the wind for a long time.
Over the next several years, there were reports that Margaret was hiding in Arizona and later in Mexico, but she successfully eluded police.
Margaret was pretty effective in her hiding. She had disguises, hair dyes, books on how to disappear, different identifications, different diplomas she'd gotten. She wasn't your normal run-of-the-mill absconder from justice.
In the meantime, a scuba diver found what looked like a gun wrapped in some cloth at the bottom of Lake Mead, about 45 miles outside of Las Vegas. The weapon had a factory-made silencer and was turned over to Las Vegas police. Torrey Johnson restored the gun and test-fired it. Under a microscope, he noticed that the test shots had very unusual markings, and they reminded Johnson of the bullets removed from Ron Rudin's skull.
I had to spend a lot of time with it, but when I finished all those examinations, there was no doubt whatsoever in my mind that that was the murder weapon. I called the DA, and I told him, I said, you know, I don't believe this, but I've got the murder weapon.
Wow. You know, wow, look what we've got here. You know, I mean, this is it. This is the big thing in the case.
And investigators got another huge break. Any gun equipped with a silencer must be registered with the federal government.
The time in the lake did some minor damage to the gun, but the serial number was still there.
When Johnson called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms with the serial number of the silencer, he was told the gun was registered to Ron Rudin. Ron had reported it missing 7 years earlier, just after he and Margaret were married.
What he said was that he knew Margaret had taken that gun. He was convinced of that, but he kept asking her, and naturally she would say no.
The only one who had access to where the gun was at, besides Ron, was Margaret.
Initially, Ron had no idea why she would have stolen it. Now, the reason is clear.
Ron loved two things in this world, guns and women. And in one night, those two very tragically came together and caused his death.
But the question remained, where was Margaret Rudin? After Margaret Rudin had eluded police for close to 2 years, a true crime television show featured the case and broadcast Margaret's photograph. A viewer in Revere, Massachusetts, reported that a woman matching Margaret's description was living near him in an apartment. Police interviewed employees of the post office across the street from the apartment, who confirmed the woman matched Margaret's description.
The takedown was a classic. You know, the Revere cops, God bless them, they did a great job.
So they set up a surveillance and waited for an opportunity.
Margaret had ordered Domino's or some pizza delivery. So the quick-thinking cops put on a pizza delivery outfit.
With a fellow officer nearby, he knocked on the apartment door.
And she opens the door, and then she looks at the pizza guy, and I said, well, the police need to come in. And they said, you know why we're here? And she says, yeah, it's about that Vegas thing.
Margaret Rudin was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. Investigators found evidence that Margaret and Ron Rudin were having marital problems. And they also found listening devices in Ron's office, put there by a company Margaret hired.
And she had intercepted a phone call between him and a girlfriend where they had agreed to meet at one of his rental homes. And in fact, Margaret, after that, made a note in a diary that was put into evidence that we had, where she was going to go and have somebody monitor them.
Margaret sensed the end of her marriage was near, and she was obviously aware of the financial implications of a divorce. Prosecutors believe Margaret waited until Ron went to sleep, then used the pistol she had taken from Ron's gun collection years earlier. The forensic evidence shows that Margaret fired 3 shots from the right side of the bed, causing blood spatter on the walls, the ceiling, and on her own portrait. She then moved to the other side and fired the last shot. Prosecutors were convinced Margaret had helped getting Ron's body into the trunk from her antique store and out to Lake Mojave, where it was cremated. But to date, no one has been charged. Prosecutors think Margaret intentionally left Ron's bracelet in clear view near the fire so the remains would be easily identified, allowing her to collect the $7 million from his estate. The murder weapon was thrown to the bottom of Lake Mead, where a weekend scuba diver happened to find it. And Ron's car was left at the Gentleman's Club as a diversion.
Margaret had been married 5 times, but she had never had financial stability. She had never made enough money on her own to live on her own. So police think that Margaret killed for one of the oldest motives in the book, and that's money.
Margaret Rutan pleaded not guilty. Her attorneys presented their own version of how Ron Rutan was killed, essentially becoming witnesses at the trial. The judge ruled this was improper.
I don't appreciate you yelling at me, Judge. Well, that's too bad.
The jury found Margaret Rutan guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
She's a chameleon. She's a chameleon in reality, and she's a chameleon psychologically.
The serial number on the silencer tied all of the pieces together.
Who would have ever thought that anyone would find that gun? That was a miracle in itself.
The fact that Margaret used a gun with a silencer was her downfall.
It resulted in really unusual markings on the bullet that ended up being the whole link to find the gun.
You know, juries are often told eyewitnesses can be mistaken. They can see things differently. Sometimes they can outright lie. But forensic evidence doesn't. I mean, it is what it is.